I don't like politics. I think it's nasty, but I also don't like injustice. I cannot see injustice, and especially when it's toward my father or my mother or my parents or my country or my people, and stay silent. And this is why I get into trouble.
Not a day goes by that I don't open the newspaper, and yes, I read the Wall Street Journal every morning, that I don't turn to page A6 or A7 or somewhere in the paper, if it's not on the cover, where there's not at least 2 or 3 or 4 articles about what's happening in Israel. Now, this was the case even before October 7th. Since then, it's really taken another level. Now, in the middle of all these stories, or most of them, is the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. There are those who love him, there are those who hate him. But at the end of the day, any objective viewer of what's been happening in Israel can look at him and know, objectively speaking, that he is one of the most impactful leaders of the state of Israel or of the West in history. When you look at Jewish leaders from the Jewish perspective, he's definitely up top, let's say top 3. And when we're talking about who else is up there, you can have lots of conversations in Jewish circles about that. And I actually think it's the case whether you like him or whether you don't like him, just understanding the impact that he's had on Israeli society. Whether we talk about the issues of October 7th and the report that came out this week of what Israel missed since October 7th, there's lots of questions about that report, who was behind it, whether it was considered an independent report or not an independent report, what the biases were. In any case, when you look at what happened on October 7th, it certainly raises a lot of questions. Israel was caught with its pants down. Israel didn't understand that Hamas was capable of this sort of attack. It's hard to believe today after we've seen it. But then when you look at how Israel was dealing with Hezbollah in the north before the war broke out versus how they easily dealt with them after the war broke out, it seems like, from my perspective, sitting here in the studio in South Florida, that Israel underprepared for Hamas and overprepared for Hezbollah, and underestimated Hamas and overestimated Hezbollah. And we're seeing the same with Iran, which is scary to say because of such a high risk that we're playing with Iran when we're talking about nuclear weapons. But so far, since this war broke out, Israel's been able to mightily handle all the rockets and missiles that were sent from Iran, and to do kind of whatever Israel has wanted to do over Iran itself, taking out many of its facilities, its missile defense systems. And now everybody's sort of holding their breath, waiting to see if Israel and the United States, either together or at least with the nod of the United States, Israel is going to take out their nuclear facilities, or at least parts of it. It seems more imminent every single day. Now, when you look at the pressure that goes around someone making these decisions, when you look at the man in the arena, Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, you have to remember the guy also has a family. He's also a husband and a father. We have with us today Yair Netanyahu, one of the prime minister's sons. Yair is known by many. By some, he's a divisive figure. There's people who like him, people who don't like him. He's definitely been the target of many, many decades of attacks by the media in Israel. We're going to talk about today with him what the media's role is in Israel and how it's been really a one-sided affair for almost all of Israel's history. And that side is clearly on the left. Recently, there's been a news station that hopefully we'll get to talk about, Channel 14, which is like the only right-wing station in Israel. And I am holding in my hands, which I haven't done in other shows, the actual page from the newspaper today, because there's so many issues when we're talking about issues to talk about with the prime minister's son, right? Iran has capabilities to build 6 bombs. That's one of the titles of the articles today in the Wall Street Journal. Israel's demand to disarm tests Syria's leaders. And then the third article is about Hamas. So they say that it returned the last bodies in the deal, in phase 1 of this deal. There are so many topics to talk about. We'll see what we explore today with Yair Netanyahu. But first, I really want to talk to him about what it's like growing up as the son of a prime minister. It's something that I think about a lot in the interactions that I've had with him in the past. We've seen a lot of this in the U.S. media with questions about President Trump and his fatherhood, what he's like as a dad. We've seen J.D. Vance taking his kids to events. There's been a lot of focus on this, and I think it's important because it's important to humanize our leaders, because as great or not great as they are, depending on your perspective, they are fathers, they are people, they are humans that are taking the plunge to take leadership and try to take things into their own hands. We live in a society where people love to quarterback Monday morning quarterback. They like to go back and say this is how things should have been done, but very few people actually want to step up and do it. So to have a front row seat from that, I'm excited to get to talk to Yair about that, to talk about his relationship with the media, to talk about the deep state in Israel, which is a real serious discussion there. We've seen it with the judicial reform dispute there that was brewing before October 7th. We even saw evidence that Hamas was following the discord in Israeli society as a sign that now is the time that they can attack. We're going to dive into a little bit October 7th, hopefully. And then also, what's the future? What's the future for Israel? What's the future for the Arabs that live in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria and the Palestinian-controlled cities especially, which is Ramallah and Jenin and all those cities, what the future looks like. And finally, I'd love to hear his perspective on Trump and the impact that Trump has on the environment today in Israel and what the outlook is. Really excited to jump into this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. This is Standpoint, and I'm Gabe Groisman. Yair Netanyahu, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be here. Thank you, Gabe.
How you doing?
It's tough days for everybody in Israel and in the Jewish people. We're going through a very painful period, but also an historical period. And I think that we have a lot of opportunities for a safe and good future for Israel and the Jewish people under the leadership of President Trump and my father. I hope that the hard part is behind us and good things are on the horizon.
Yeah, this is, we're filming on Thursday. The episode will come out on Tuesday. We come out every Tuesday. And I make sure to say that because things move so quickly these days when it comes to the war in Israel in particular, but with everything, with news cycles. This week we saw the funeral of the Bibas family and Yarden, the father, hearing his words, which I think cut all hearts, all Jewish hearts for sure, all 15.5 or 6 million of us, all of our collective hearts, hearing his apology to his wife for not saving them, and all his words, his loving words to his wife who was killed at the hands of Hamas and his two babies. And really, really a tough week, you're right. And it's difficult as a Jewish person here in America where, we have a lot of things we're dealing with, right? There's a lot of issues, there's a lot of problems. I'm also an ultimate optimist, so I'm always trying to find the good things. But every time we pay attention to what's happening in Israel, which is every day, whether it's good or bad news, it's hard. It's hard to internalize it and keep dealing with it. So thanks for reminding me of that time. Let's just go back a little. I want to come back to where we are at October 7th, to what we're dealing with in Israel, to what the future of Israel looks like, why the Jews are there. Let's talk big picture. But I think it would be really interesting to talk to you a little bit about your upbringing, right? Because your father's been in the public eye forever, since the 90s or even before that. And
80s.
Since the 80s, when he was a United Nations ambassador, right?
And
then came over. He was prime minister once and then twice and then a third time. And between that, he was finance minister and held other big public positions. And throughout all of that, you were growing up with your siblings. What was it like? What was it like to grow up with a father in the spotlight like that?
It's not specifically the spotlight. It's specifically my dad. Is a unique circumstances because on the one hand, it's a great privilege to be next to really this bigger than life character that I think he'll be remembered as one of the greatest leaders of Jewish history, and the things that he overcome, the challenges he overcome for the country, which is, no other country leader need to deal with the stuff that the leader of Israel need to deal with. No other head of state need to think about the survival of his country. They can think about, the country's declining or growing or, getting better or getting worse, but no leader of any country think about the very existence and survival of of his own country, because Israel is the only country in the world that is under existential threat. So it's a privilege to witness all of his endeavor and all of his fights for our country, for the Jewish people. But it's also very painful because the price for that is very high from the media and from the power centers in Israel. It's very similar to the story with President Trump and the elite in America the war of the American elite against him, the media, the deep state, the lawfare.
Oh, let's
It's
jump.
hard.
Let's jump into all those things. Those are all interesting topics. I think
Yeah.
I want to peel back the onion there. But tell me, when you were a kid, he was just your dad, right? And with time, you've been able to realize his position in the world and how he's going to be remembered as one of the important leaders, maybe in history for sure, in Jewish history. I think even those who don't like him would admit that his impact has been tremendous. And but in the beginning, he was just your dad for your childhood, and you had to grow up. I saw a picture you posted recently. You were at the Blair House again a couple weeks ago, but you posted a picture also of being at the Blair House when you were a kid, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Not recently, but maybe from a while ago.
A while ago, but
Yeah.
I recalled that you posted a picture when you were there. Right, you grew up sort of in these spaces. What was your father like, or what is he like as a father?
Well, he was, always very loving and caring and involved. Of course, when you're a child, you don't see the other part of him. You only see him as a father. You don't understand, the bigger picture. And they say that you should never meet the person that you're admiring because you'll be disappointed. Because you see, he's just, he's just a regular person. But with my dad, the more I get to know him, the more I admire him. The more I grow up and understanding what he do, what he sacrifice, his capabilities of navigating the Jewish people and the Jewish state and in in rough seas, and with so much pressure and so much hatred and so much persecution and all of that. It's really, I and his capabilities are incredible, and I really admire him.
Are you guys a close family?
We are, yes.
And your brother Avner is in Tel Aviv?
He's working, yeah. He's working a consulting group. He has a master's from Oxford, so it's very smart. Smart guy.
I've met him before. He's a charming guy, and also just comes off as very confident in what he's trying to accomplish, sort of on his own realm. You I think have been more drawn to the political side of things. Am I right?
I don't like politics. I think it's nasty, but I also don't like injustice, and this is what draw me into the public limelight. Because I cannot see injustice, and especially when it's toward my father or my mother or my parents or my country or my people, and stay silent. And this is why I get into trouble, because I'm my way to fight is through social media. In Israel, I had a radio show, and I was writing columns, but this is today's fights. It's in the public square, right? The new public square, social media, and trying to get facts out. It's very hard. A lie is so much more powerful than the truth, especially when the person that says a lie controls the media, controls the narrative, has the big money. But I try to do my best.
Yeah, it's interesting when you, if anyone follows you and follows, the kind of work that you're doing, especially online. See, like you're saying, you're out there fighting things. You've quieted down a lot since October 7th. I think that's probably was a smart move given the delicacy of everything that's happening.
Well, I'm focusing more about the injustices since to the Jewish people and to Israel. And part of what I do now is I'm doing speeches and speaking events in all across the United States about Israel, giving our case when it comes to the conflict with the Palestinians, when it comes to our rights of our ancestral homeland. Justice is on our side, and it's very important to say it out loud. And I especially make the speeches in churches and in places like that to show how Jews and Christians are intertwined, and we have the same threats, the same roots, the same Judeo-Christian civilization, but we also face common threats to our existence and both our nations of Israel and America. And these two threats is radical Islam and radical, how would I say, woke, progressive culture that is existential threat for our civilization, for our way of life, for our liberty.
Yeah, and the places where those two things meet the most is in Europe. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I had former Prime Minister Liz Truss sitting in that same chair here in the studio. She wrote a book called 10 Years to Save the West, and she still thinks that they're behind the curve, like they're still behind the tipping point, that they can still change things. I don't necessarily agree when you look at the numbers there. But I asked her a question that I thought was an important question for the Jewish community, because you speak to Jews in the UK, and they don't feel safe, and they don't feel safe at all. I had here a good friend of mine who lives in London, who's actually not Jewish, but she's very involved in pro-Israel advocacy. And we were sitting having a coffee right down the street here in Miami, and she was just blown away by the fact that people were wearing kippahs on their heads. She saw Israeli flags everywhere. She saw non-Jews, Jews walking back and forth. Everybody was sort of proud and just living their own life. And she said, there's not one street in the UK that you can walk down and see the same thing.
Yeah.
So I asked Liz Truss, the Prime Minister.
And it's not because the native Brits.
No, it's not. But I did ask her, I said, is it safe for Jews to live in the UK still? And she says, I think the question is it safe for anyone to live in the UK still? And I think that was actually a fair response. But as Jews, we always talk about anti-Semitism being the canary in the coal mine, right? The indicator of something else bigger that's wrong in society. And I think now we're actually seeing that. In the U.S., I think the only place we see the marriage of that radical Islam and the radical left, if that's the term we're going with.
The Red-Green Alliance.
Is the Red-Green Alliance is on college campuses, right? Yeah. That's the only place we're seeing it here. What kind of response are you getting from the speeches you're giving? What have you seen? What has surprised you from being out in the community giving speeches?
It didn't surprise me, but it's very heartwarming to see the American Christian evangelical and not just evangelical support for Israel and the Jewish people. We've seen since October 7 in the news all the the horrible anti-Semitism riots and protests in colleges and across America, but this is not the real America. This is just it's heavily artificial, paid, funded by countries like Qatar and the most radical intellectual elite, quote unquote, which they're not really elite, but they're living in their own little bubble. And this is not the American people. The American people are very pro-Israel, and very, they understand, very intuitively who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. They understand that the Palestinians who invaded Israel on October 7 and did mass raping and beheadings and killing of women and children and kidnapping, all of that, they're the bad guys. By the way, on October 7, I don't know exactly most, but a big part of the atrocities were not carried out only by Hamas, but by regular Palestinian civilians who saw the news that the border is open and just walked in. And a lot of the more, even the Bibas family was kidnapped by regular, innocent, quote unquote, civilians. Not so innocent, of course, but this is how the BBC and CNN describe them, this innocent civilians. And the American people understand that.
When you're saying what you're talking about, the U.S. society versus, first of all, how they're manipulated and the media, how it sort of paints a picture that's not when you go speak to people on the streets, unless you're in the Northeast somewhere, or in California, almost everywhere else, even if they're voting one way or the other, you don't see the radicalism that you see online and in the media.
And also the polls show tremendous American support. Like all of the biggest polls show that.
But the polls, it's interesting. There's a poll that Democrats like to tout that talks about how 2/3 of Democrats support Israel. But it's I'll just use the word, it's bullshit, because if you look at the actual poll, when you get to under 30, the number's under 50%. It really gets worse and worse as you're getting younger. And those are the people that are driving policy. If you go into any senator's or member congressman's office, everyone that's in the Democratic establishment, the professionals that are working behind the staff, and I use the word professional lightly or technically, that they're being paid to work there, right? So that's why they're professionals.
By the way, so there is an unfortunate, trend headed by the universities of basically brainwashing factories of youth, which is anti-Western, anti-American, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, and anti-Israeli. And being anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli is just a small part of the puzzle of a much bigger picture of hating America. We've saw in this pro-Palestinian protests in the last year and a half, they don't only burn the Israeli flags, they burn the American flags as well. They take down the American flags from the poles and they burn it, and they rise the Palestinian flag instead. And, it's very important to also notice that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The biggest private donor of American elite universities is Qatar. And they're deliberately pushing in radical organizations like the Soros Group, and they deliberately pushing this anti-Western, anti-Christian, anti-Israeli narrative in order to crumble the American society from within. So the hatred to Israel is just a small part of it.
Yeah, so you'll be glad to know a couple comments. One is, on a state-by-state basis, governors across the country on the Republican side are taking a deep look at the tenure system that sort of lets professors do whatever they want. Governor Sanders from Arkansas was here. Hopefully the new ambassador's daughter, they're doing a whole program calling
Huckabee,
Educate, Don't Indoctrinate, where they're hopefully going to be taking away automatic tenure in their state. And it's a trend that's happening everywhere, looking at the funding, looking at giving these professors sort of a green light, carte blanche to do whatever they want and teach whatever they want. But it's interesting. I want to fly over the Atlantic, because a lot of the issues you're talking about also exist in Israel. And we don't talk about it often on this show. But in Israel, you have the same issues in universities. Maybe it's funded by different people, but the same
people.
In universities, you have indoctrination, anti-Israel, anti-West indoctrination. You have funded from dark money. Maybe it's not so dark. Maybe you can shed some light on it. Huge protests happen every day for years on the streets, blocking highways, blocking the airport, etc. Also, I'd like to say that when I talk to people on the street, and I think I have, my father's not the prime minister. He's a great doctor and a great person. I love him a lot. But it gives me the ability to go talk to people on the left in a way. And maybe, I don't know, but maybe you don't have that opportunity to do that because of your last name, let's say. And when I talk to people, most of the people I talk to, even if they're wrong, they're not as radical as the media makes them sound. Because the media, the narrative that they're pushing, that they're driving is just craziness. You've been a target of the media in Israel since you probably turned 18 years old, maybe even before.
No, since I was a baby.
Since you were a baby.
Yeah, I can elaborate.
Tell me a little bit about the media and how they've, how you said they've been a target. You've been a target of theirs since you were a kid in Israel. Tell me a little bit about that and how that translates to today.
So the media in Israel, it's very similar to America when you have the legacy media, the mainstream media, which is really radical. It's like the North Korean television can take lessons of how to make good propaganda from the Israeli legacy media. It's astonishing. Their violence, their hatred, their shameless propaganda and lies are really exceptional. I think even if you compare it to the legacy media in the United States, until recently, there was no conservative media in Israel whatsoever, unlike in America that you have Fox News and Newsmax for a long time. Thank God, in recent years, there is it became the second most rated channel in Israel. It's called Channel 14, which is the Israeli equivalent of Fox News, of course, with a fraction of the money.
I've been on it once. I was on it once.
So you see, and it's growing because although they have a fraction of the money of their competitors, the Israeli public is mostly conservative. When we have in recent election, when it was 50-50, it's very not reflecting of the reality of the ground, because we need to remember that Israel have a 20% Arab Muslim population, that a big chunk of them see themselves as Palestinians. They don't see themselves as part of the people of Israel. They'll be insulted if you'll tell them, they say, their identity is Palestinian, very hostile to the Zionist movement. Not all of them. Some of them, the Christians are very, becoming more and more involved. And you have amazing people like Yusuf Haddad, who's doing a great, PR for Israel, and is an Arab Christian who served in the army as a combat soldier. And you do have even some Muslims in the combat positions in the Israeli army, but it's a minority. And the majority are seeing themselves as Palestinians. So when the Israeli left are in cahoots with the Arab Muslim Party of Israel, some of these parties are radical Islamist parties that are part of the Muslim Brotherhood. The previous government that was in order to oust my dad with Bennett, who got 5% of the votes, but somehow they made him the prime minister. In order to get the to the threshold of 51% of the government, they needed to include in the government and in the coalition the Muslim Brotherhood Party of Israel, which is, it's the same Muslim Brotherhood is also the ideology of Hamas and ISIS and Al Qaeda and the Taliban, and they were part of the Israeli government. So
that's Mansour Abbas and his party?
I'm just saying that they are part of the global Muslim Brotherhood family, we can call it. But if you focus in the Jewish population of Israel, the people of Israel, it's an overwhelming majority conservative compared to a minority of, let's say, progressive, woke, socialist. And the thing in Israel, which it is similar to America, it's like you would go to Fifth Avenue or you would go to Beverly Hills, or maybe not, no, Beverly Hills, not so much, but, like Hollywood, whatever, it's very, very Democrat. But that's not the real America. The real America is not Manhattan and it's not Hollywood. I mean, the real America is Arkansas and Oklahoma and this kind of places. So this in Israel, it's very similar when it comes to that you got Tel Aviv, which is very, very radical lefty. But then you get the rest of the country, which is conservative and wants, traditional Jewish values and have, very proud, Zionistic approach and Jewish approach. But the minority of the radical left, they control almost 100% of the media, 100% of the courts, 100% of the whole judiciary system, 100% of the state prosecution, and all the power centers of Israel, the universities, the academia, the big money, in high tech and all of that. So you have a minority that control the country undemocratically through the institutions they built, through the deep state, basically.
So let's get into the deep state, but I want to get a better understanding. You were talking about how the media has been coming after you since you were a kid. Give me some examples. What are the most egregious examples of the media's attack on you personally?
Well, they started doing like sketches about me, laughing on me when I was 5 years old, and the whatever back then equivalent of Saturday Night Live in Israel, which is illegal, by the way, because you have the Child Protection Act and all of that. But of course, when it comes to my family, everything goes. They were attacking me when I was in high school, writing articles about me, I don't know, about gossip from, I don't know, what can you write about a high school student, but, which is also, I was underage, so it's also illegal, but, and
so you went to a regular high school?
Yeah.
And what was that like? So you're in high school, your media's writing articles about you, your dad, was he prime minister at the time?
I think it was right before, it was like my last year in high school before I joined the army when they did this hit piece on me, and I was still 17 or 16 or something like that. But so he was just recently elected,
right,
in 2009.
And was it tough? Was it tough to be in high school with your dad? Sort of, he was the head of the opposition, and then he was prime minister. So what was that like?
I mean, it's not easy because I went to schools that are more in the progressive, liberal spectrum of politics. So, you get that. But the toughest things is to see what they're doing to your parents, because what they did to me is a joke compared to what they did to my parents, and especially to my dad. The persecution is so ferocious, so, cruel. So, yeah, but you're getting used to it eventually.
It's interesting. What impacts you more is them going after your parents than even going after you?
When they're going after my dad, it really bothers me, because my dad dedicated his life for the country, for the Jewish people. He was an officer in the army, in our version of Navy SEALs, sort of Sayed Matkal. He got shot. He almost got killed several times during his service. For people who doesn't know, his brother, Jonathan Netanyahu, was the commander of Sayed Matkal, of this Navy SEAL sort of unit. He was killed when he was leading the rescue operation of a hijacked Air France airplane with Israeli passengers in Uganda. So that was a big deal back then. They even, because his brother, Jonathan, that was killed, he was born in America. And they lived many years in Philadelphia. And there's even a monument in his honor in Philadelphia, very close to the Liberty Bell.
I've been there, I've seen it, and I think you know this, but in my family, my wife and my kids hold your uncle, his memory of blessing, Yoni Netanyahu, as a hero not just because of how he fell, but because of how he led his life. And anybody who has not read the compilation of the letters of his life, the letters of Yoni Netanyahu, everyone should read them. It's a reflection of a deep love of Israel, a deep sense of pride, a deep sense of understanding of history and a place in history. He talks a lot about something interesting that I bring up, talking about your uncle. I know you have another uncle, or other uncles, but talking about, you say Jonathan Yoni Netanyahu. He talks about when he was in high school in America and his yearning to go back to Israel, and he's comparing what kids in America are thinking about in high school versus what kids in Israel are thinking about in high school. And he says here, we know they're thinking about, I'm paraphrasing, of course. I didn't even know we'd be talking about this, but I speak about this often. He talks about here in the U.S., they think about mundane things. What are they going to wear? What dance are they going to go to? All these silly things that are inconsequential, sort of like the innocence of childhood. Whereas in Israel, people are thinking about how they're going to contribute to society, how they're going to help build their country, how they're going to help protect their land and their people. Getting ready to go to the army, which is a conscription service, and how eager he was to going back there from this beautiful life he had here in the U.S. And I think it's very telling.
Unfortunately, unfortunately for us in Israel, America basically got the jackpot of geography, the best geography in the world, and Israel had the worst, basically. America is a huge country and spreading across a continent with 2 oceans on both sides to protect it and 2 friendly neighbors, Mexico and Canada. Well, Israel is a tiny country in the size of New Jersey, surrounded in the heart of the most, medieval place on earth, in an ocean, a little island in an ocean of radical Islam and societies that live according to, basically early medieval laws and norms. And we saw it on October 7th, but we also see it throughout. This is a clash of civilization. This is, barbarian societies that worship death, that have no value to life, that, have no problem of deliberately murdering children and women and babies, as we saw on October 7th and as we saw many times. And then you have a Western, liberal, open, life-loving society, which is Israel, that live like the rest of the Western free world in the 21st century, and this clash. But Israel is just the forefront of Western civilization, because this radical Islam is not going to be satisfied if, God forbid, they manage to destroy Israel. It's just going to be a stepping stone for the next target, which is Europe, and the big target, the main target, which is the big Satan, which is America. And they say so.
What's interesting is these are things we've known for such a long time. There's videos of your father talking about the exact same thing when he was a student at MIT, whenever that was, many, many years ago. And it's like the story's the same. And we as a society, as a Western society, both in Israel and outside of Israel, we seem to have short memories. And we always project what we hope our enemies are like versus what they really are like. And when I hear people say, and they're saying it again now, all they really want, now they're talking about the people in Gaza, but they say the same thing about people in Syria and in different countries in the region, where they say all they want is to raise their families in peace and prosperity and be left alone and take care of themselves. And, they want the same things you and I want. And I'm like, no, they don't.
Yeah.
That's not what they're after at all.
Since 2005, the Palestinians got their own country as even this 2-state solution. It happened. They had Gaza as 100% independent, their own country. They elected Hamas, which is a terrorist group, not only according to Israel, but according to the United States and the European Union as well. Nobody forced them to elect them. And they got billions of foreign aid that they received from Europe, from America, from the Arab world, and instead really making it like Singapore, it's a beautiful strip of coast on the Mediterranean and could have been heaven. But instead, they took 100% of the money into building their terrorist infrastructure, their tunnels to cross into Israel, and their missile. It became a huge missile launch pad against Israel. And so you see, if they only wanted to live a normal, happy life, they would take this money they got from the world, which the Palestinians, by the way, got more money from the world than Europe got after World War II to reconstruct Europe from the devastation of the war. And look where Europe is and where the Palestinian society is. There's a problem with not with the genes, of course, but with the culture. There's a radical culture that their only identity is antithesis for the Jews and for Israel, and not their basic desire is not to create their own state, but to destroy the Jewish state, unfortunately. And we saw this in Gaza. Why did they attack us on October 7th? Nothing happened. It's nothing. It's like, why did they invade it? They knew what's coming, right? Obviously, they knew that Gaza's going to be devastated from, Israel protecting itself after this invasion of murdering 1,500 civilians and kidnapping hundreds of civilians, Israeli civilians. They knew that there's going to be serious consequences in Gaza, but they didn't care. And you see, it's not just Hamas. The average Joe in Gaza was ecstatic. We have countless of videos from October 7th. They were all super happy. They were parading the hostages in the streets of Gaza on that day, and no one was saying, "Oh, this is wrong. This is just innocent children and women dragged out from a party or from a rave party or from their homes." No, they were all cheering and spitting on them, and again, as we said before, a big chunk of the atrocities that happened inside Israel on October 7th was carried out by civilians.
And we saw them celebrating when they brought out the caskets of the Bibas family as well, right? Even kids, people brought their babies out to watch.
It was a show.
So it's clear Israel was surprised on October 7th. It feels like the whole world was surprised by it. And were you surprised by the strength of Hamas and by the attack, you yourself personally?
Well, of course, it was shocking for everybody, I think, in the world that saw this barbarity and, scenes we thought we'll never see again after the Holocaust. And it was the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. What really caught me by surprise is, the world reaction to this. Because after 9/11, the world came together, standing behind America, rightfully so. And when America went to war in Afghanistan because they were hosting the Taliban, because they were hosting Al-Qaeda and Bin Laden, the world understood that. And of course, it was a war that took many years in order until they eventually got Bin Laden. But with Israel, it was, I think, few weeks after October 7th, the world started to attack Israel, while we are literally fighting for our survival. Per capita, the massacre of October 7th was, much bigger than 9/11 if you use the per capita victims to the general population. And, it was so graphic with the videos and everything. And even in the same day, you already had this pro-Palestinian protests in Times Square. Like, what did they even protest? Israel didn't even retaliate yet. So they were basically celebrating, you had the celebration of massacre of Jews. And, I don't understand why, the world was not backing Israel after October 7th, like they were backing rightfully America after 9/11. Well, we are literally fighting for our survival. Again, it's not a land on the other side of the world. It's right on our doorstep, as we saw, 20 miles from Tel Aviv, basically. I think it had a big part because the world is following America, and the administration in America was very hostile. To be honest, was very hostile to Israel and to the Jewish people. And under this administration, you had the largest wave of anti-Semitism in American history. Even if America never had this wave of anti-Semitism in its history, not even in the 18th century, 19th century, and all these times. under this administration. And
about the previous administration,
the Biden administration, yes, the Biden-Obama administration. And that's why I'm very hopeful after Trump won the election and we already see it, the whole trend is changing because America is now backing its ally, backing the good side, backing the pro-American side, backing the Western side, and is being harsh on its enemies like Iran, like the radical Islamic Palestinian Hamas, and I see a very positive trend when it comes to the conflict. Since
how does the Israeli media, first of all, how did the Israeli media report the Biden administration, the issue with delaying of arms, first rejecting arms, then delaying arms, funneling money to Hamas, all the different things, keeping the Israeli troops out of Rafah, all the different roadblocks that they put into place that we're aware of here, I'm sure you're aware of there. But how did the mainstream Israeli media cover all of that?
So again, it's going back to our, the deep state problem of Israel. The deep state in Israel doesn't stand on its own. It's an extension of the American deep state. And we see now that USAID was heavily involved not only by funding Hamas and radical Palestinian terrorist organization, but also funding radical anarchist organizations inside Israel. They were behind the riots and the judicial reform. They were behind the riots during the COVID. And you see a lot of similarities between the BLM riots in America and the riots in Israel. Same slogans, same logos, same funders, Soros, but also USAID, European Union.
But why do you think the Israeli population seems that it's from the outside, it seems like it's easy to get them mobilized? Or you see thousands of people protesting on different things, whether it's judicial reforms or the hostages, which everyone agrees we got to get the hostages out, we have to rescue them, but they still turn it into a protest and they get all these people out on the streets. What is it about Israeli society that's always...
It's not about Israeli
It seems like a college campus.
Israel have 9 million people. And when you have a heavily funded, organized group, you don't need more than several of thousands of paid agitators like we saw with Antifa and BLM. And when the media is on your side, you can bring out 5,000 people and they will report it to be 100,000 people. I'm not even kidding. We had this scenario. We had this incidence of, when the media is on their side and the state prosecution on their side, in Israel, it's blocking a highway. It's a 3-year jail felony. In the disengagement in 2005, 13-year-old girls, they just attempted to block the highway for literally 2 seconds, protesting the fact that they're being kicked out of their homes in the Gaza Strip. And by the way, this is what brought us to this situation. It didn't come out of nowhere. So they were sent to arrest, for half a year without even seeing a lawyer. You had tens of thousands of people who were protesting the disengagement plan of Ariel Sharon, sent to arrest and jail time. While here, you have several thousands of people, the same paid agitators, blocking Israel's highway and setting them on fire for time and time and time again for years now, and you don't have even one indictment because they're doing this on behalf of our judicial oligarchy that are the real rulers of the country. Unfortunately, it's a long story to go into if you want, but basically for the last 30 years, you have unelected the Supreme Court that elect itself, unlike in America, that the people elect the president and then the president elect his nominee to the Supreme Court, and then Senate approve or disapprove the nominee by a vote after a public hearing. In Israel, you have a closed committee that the judges have a majority, so they just keep replicating themselves. So although the Israeli vast majority of the population is conservative, you have this tiny, small, radical left-wing, anti-Zionist, post-Zionist at least, elite that keep replicating themselves and putting themselves in the power centers of the state prosecution and the Supreme Court and basically all the courts. So they have immunity from the law to do these riots, but we know that it's funded and organized and, a big part from the American deep state, from the Obama-Biden administration.
But the question I have And those were, so people have context, those were the protests that we were seeing, protests/riots, but mostly protests that we were seeing.
It was mostly riots.
Or mostly riots. And all over in the summer of 2023, before October 7th.
Yeah.
And before, but the summer was really the I don't know, the high point.
And it led to October 7th, among other things, because they were also leading this mass movement in the army, in the reserves of especially the Air Force and the intelligence corps, of refusing to serve in the army and refusing to go to reserves duty, which is also criminal.
At least they were saying they weren't going to go to reserve duty, and Hamas, there was
Hamas and Iran heard them and say, great, this is the time to strike. When Israel supposedly its army, according to what the Israeli media, mainstream legacy media, is saying that the Israel army is collapsing, but all of this is illegal. All of this trying to bring down the reserve duty in Israel and calling not to go to the army, it's illegal. But they
went out the window on October 7th.
They have
over-reported.
I hope so. I hope so that this is not an option anymore for the radical left in Israel to try to break down, to destroy our army and our reserves. And it's also, how did we get here? You had two major historical events that happened that led us to where we are. The first one is the Oslo Accords in 1993. For people that don't know about the Oslo Accords, before the Oslo Accords, there was almost no death in the so-called Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The first Intifada in the 80s was, mostly, teenager Palestinians throwing rocks on Israeli soldiers, and maybe a little bit of stabbing, but you can't compare it to the second Intifada, and you can't compare it to the
You're saying the wars before then were with other nations, not with the Arabs living within Israel.
And yes, there was almost no casualties from the Palestinians statistically compared to what happened after Oslo.
I mean, there were massacres like in 1929 in Hebron
Yes, but I'm talking from 1967 until when Israel was attacked by all the Arab world, and Israel liberated Judea and Samaria from the Jordanian occupation. There was no Palestinian independent state, by the way, in 1967 that Israel came. Judea and Samaria was illegally occupied, and East Jerusalem were illegally occupied by the Kingdom of Jordan, and Gaza was illegally occupied by Egypt. And those two countries, including Syria, attacked us in 1967, and Israel defended itself and won the war and regained its ancestral homelands and the land that it rightfully owned according to the San Remo Accords and the British Mandate of Palestine, that the mandate was given to the British Empire by the League of Nations, and it adopted the Balfour Declaration in the Mandate of Palestine, saying that the Jews are the native that's supposed to inherit the land, which is Israel and Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip, to their own national home after the British mandate, because mandate is a way to give the British and French empires a temporary control over a land, mostly from the Turkish Ottoman Empire in the aftermath of World War I, in order to temporarily control it and eventually give it back to the natives. And the natives that were supposed to inherit the British mandate of Palestine according to the San Remo Accords, and it was later ratified in the League of Nations and then in the United Nations when it was established, because the United Nations automatically adopted all the mandates of the League of Nations, and it was ratified in the American Congress and in the British Parliament. So basically, it's international law that this is our land. The green line that separates Israel to Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip was a temporary ceasefire line of end of temporary hostilities between Israel, Jordan, and Egypt in the aftermath of the Independence War of 1948. It was Israel actually approached Jordan and Egypt to accept the new ceasefire line as an internationally recognized political border, but they refused because they didn't recognize Israel's right to exist. So basically, in a nutshell, Israel created the Palestinian Authority in the aftermath of the Oslo Accords by bringing the PLO, that was a terrorist organization, according to the United States, not only according to Israel, bringing them from far away Tunisia, which is thousands or so miles from Israel, bringing them into the heartland of Israel, 15 miles to the east of Tel Aviv and to the Gaza Strip, which is 20 miles to Tel Aviv, creating the Palestinian Authority, giving control on the cities of the Palestinians, Arab cities, to a terrorist organization, the PLO, that since they radicalize the population through their educational system and through their media, naming streets and squares in the Palestinian Authority, which is considered the moderates. They're naming streets and squares after terrorists that murdered Jewish children, etc. Their whole educational system is basically Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda, calling for the annihilation of all Jews in Israel, and this is how we got there. And then in 2005, you had a disengagement, kicking out all the Jews that lived in the Gaza Strip for generations, getting the Israeli army out of it, and leaving the border between Gaza and Egypt to the Palestinians, which later elected Hamas. And basically, this border became a highway of smugglings of all these weapons, and all these weapons that used for October 7 was smuggled from Egypt, and because Israel was not there on this border, and all the hundreds of thousands of rockets that Gaza fired on Israeli civilian cities since 2005 was all smuggled from this border. So this is the two crucial historical mistakes that Israel made, because of our deep state pressure in some cases and our media apparatus to push this.
So let's fast forward, because now in Israel, ceasefire lines become borders, or de facto borders, that we have to talk about for decades, if not worse. And now we're in another ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Again, it's Thursday. This episode will come out Tuesday. Who knows what will happen this weekend, because things move so quickly in this region of the world in particular, in that region of the world in particular. What do you think of the current state of the war now, the ceasefire? And from your perspective, I know you're not in government, it's your dad, but from your perspective, someone who observes politics closely.
I am very optimistic because of the change in the United States, and because of President Trump and his tremendous support to Israel and his plan to the Gaza Strip. And I really think that President Trump is our modern day, King Cyrus from the Bible. He is the leader of the most powerful country in the world that the rest of the world follows. Wherever America goes, the rest of the world follows. When America was hostile to Israel under the Obama-Biden administrations, the world was hostile to Israel as well. And under the first administration of Trump, the world was very kind to Israel, because everybody wanted to be on the good side of the United States. And under his leadership, we managed to get the peace accords with 4 Arab Muslim countries. So I'm very positive when it comes to Gaza as well. Israel have 3 goals in Gaza. It's public, the 3 goals that Israel have in Gaza: release all the hostages, and making sure that Gaza will never be a threat to Israel ever again, and bringing down Hamas, not only as a military power, but also as a political power. We will never give up on any one of these 3 goals. And I think it will be very much easier to achieve it under the leadership of President Trump.
So it's interesting, when Trump came up with the Gaza plan, and there's lots of fun AI graphics about Trump's Gaza, which is a lot of fun to look at. I encourage everybody to look it up. Sometimes it's nice to add a little bit of light and levity to really difficult situations, and that does that. But Trump has said many times since then that he puts forward the plan, but it's Israel's decision. What does Israel want to do? Saying the same thing about the green light he's giving Israel now publicly to go into Gaza, to flatten Gaza, to open the gates of hell is a term he uses. But the choice ultimately is Israel's. It's not the United States.
It's a long process to get these 3 goals done, and we're in the middle of the process. We're not in the end of it.
So is the way you look at it that you can't think about whether to move the people from Gaza out of Gaza until those goals are done, or are those part of?
No, I think it's intertwining. It doesn't contradict. When they said, when there was the war with Ukraine, you have millions of Ukrainian civilians that left the war zone and went to Poland and went to neighboring countries, And for some reason, the Palestinians who are living, in a war zone because of what they did on October 7 and because of Hamas using this territory as a launch pad of missiles against Israel for 2 decades now. So because of that, it's a war zone because we need to defend ourselves and we need to make sure that this will never happen again, October 7, just like what America did in Afghanistan and etc. and in Iraq. So, why can't they leave? There is 50 Muslim majority countries. There is 22 Arab countries. The Palestinians are Arab Muslims. Their flag is almost identical to the Jordanian flag.
The Arab countries have come back and said they're not taking them, which is no surprise, right?
Because of two reasons. Because they know how radical they are. Even inside the Arab world, they were kicked out from Jordan from trying to make a coup against the king in the 1970s, I think. And then they arrived to Lebanon that used to be actually a beautiful Christian Western country, secular country, and they destroyed it and made it. They started the civil war there that ended up in many Christians fleeing the country and
become. Right. So what's the plan if they're not going to take them? So what's
America has a tremendous leverage. Colombia and Panama said also they're not going to cooperate with President Trump, and you saw what happened. America has tremendous leverage over the world. It's the most powerful country militarily and economically and culturally, and I'm very optimistic. And, there's so many things that Trump did in his career that everybody said it's impossible. But, he did it. He did the impossible again and again and again. His comeback, it's like, he's doing the impossible again and again. And I have great hopes from that. But I think the West need to stop this fantasy of this two-state solution. It's not going to happen. It happened. We created a Palestinian Authority. It only caused more death in the Palestinian side and the Israeli side since the Oslo Accords. It was a Palestinian state in Gaza, and it ended up firing rockets on Israeli civilians and doing October 7. It's not working. This land is ours according to ancient history. Everywhere you dig in Israel, in Judea and Samaria, you'll find ancient archaeological Jewish findings from 3,000 years ago and from 2,000 years ago. Even at the time of the Romans, the land was known as province of Judea. The only reason that today in the West, some people call it Palestine is because the Jews revolted against the Romans time and time again until the final revolt, with the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century AD. Part of crushing the revolt and punishing the Jews was changing the name of the province from province of Judea to province of Palestine, after the ancient nemesis of the Jews, the Philistines, from the Bible, that even at the time of the Romans no longer existed and were an ancient people coming from Greece, and they had nothing to do with Arabs or Islam. And when the British came and they called it the British Mandate of Palestine in the early 20th century, they named it after the ancient Roman name that was named because of that, for that reason, from the 2nd century AD. But that's it. But if you look at the most common last names of the Palestinian Authority, you see El Masri, which means Egyptian. You see Khalabi, which means a person from Aleppo in Syria. You see Hijazi, which is an area in Saudi Arabia. You even have a famous interview of a Hamas leader from around 10 years ago to an Egyptian television and said, there's no such thing as Palestinians. We are Egyptians. We are, descendants from immigrants from the 19th century from the Delta. Take care of us. Come on, we're Egyptians. You can find it, I think, on YouTube somewhere. I forgot the name of the video. So, it's not working. This two-state fantasy only cause death and misery, not only for Israelis, but also for Palestinians. If you ask a Palestinian who's old enough, when were you better off? Under direct Israeli control before the Oslo Accords in the early 90s and in the 80s, or since you were under the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, when you had a better life, daily life. Everyone will tell you it was before the Oslo Accords. Every Gazan will tell you it was before the disengagement from 2005 and the rise of Hamas. And it's time to see the facts as they are.
So I'll tell you, I'm only going to respond in two ways. One is you have to promise to come back because I want to dive into this deep. I have my own opinions on all of this, deep-seated beliefs and opinions on the why, but also on the how in the future, and that there was a two-state solution because the first thing the British did was they split the land of Palestine and they created
Transjordan was created
Transjordan,
it's
exactly,
true, that,
in
which is
1916, 17.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more there, but there's also the truth that today nobody cares about history and facts. They care about realities on the ground, and there's an argument to be made there. And okay, that's the history. Now, what are we going to do now? Which is a much deeper discussion. So we have to talk about that on another time. This is the longest podcast I've done so far. We're at an hour plus. But
we only scratched the surface.
We've only scratched the surface. So you got to promise to come back as we watch this unfold and continue to break this down and try to find common ground. And I actually think I like this platform for you, and I'll tell you why. Not my podcast in particular. You don't do much media at all.
No.
In fact, when you're in the media, it's usually for some drama that's happening. You were in the media this week because someone said some crazy thing about
Well, character assassination is the fate of every conservative prominent figure in the West, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I think you should be out there more. I think the way the world is consuming information today, it's long form. That's true in Israel, and it's true here. It's true everywhere in the world. People are getting sick of the media. So you don't have to speak just in quotes and that you're giving to some reporter, but to actually be able to explain yourself. People can agree or disagree, but they at least can see that you're a person with opinions and thought process, and you want to see something forward. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Gabe.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow, and do all the great things you do to support podcasts, and we'll see you next time.